Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to the second episode of the Galaxy podcast. I'm very happy that you're here with me today again. So, as I already said before, this is kind of freestyle. Like, the only thing that I thought of that I really want to cover today is the topic of slowness. Because, I will explain it with the example of a relationship simply because that's what's happened a lot in my life, is that I feel like we as a society really always look for definition. Actually, when I wrote a blog article about the Unalome, which is a Buddhist symbol uh, that describes the path to enlightenment, I realized that there is no such thing as disidentification. So once you identified as something, there is not really a word for undoing that. And I believe it really speaks tons about us as a society and how we interact with the world. Because normally, the ego looks for things to identify with. We see that especially in teenagers, where they really want to associate with their peers, and everything that is outside of that bubble is uncool and unrelatable. Yeah, so it's really a thing to identify with something, and I believe that a lot of us as teenagers maybe did this over identification thing, right? So if you are one thing, you cannot be the other. Yeah, so if you're a hippie, you cannot be a punk. It goes into a very extreme kind of identification when we are younger. And as I've seen with myself and a lot of my friends, I'm 35 now, it kind of dissolves over the years. Some of us, I think, really change and want to, or not even change, but they want to identify with the pictures they have of a perfect husband or a perfect employee or a perfect career. I think that happens to a lot of us, in our late 20s, beginning of our 30s. But also, it dissolves a little bit because we start to understand that we can be one thing and the other. Yeah? Depending on how much we like a definition, we do not necessarily identify over just this one thing anymore. Yeah, because on one hand we have grown, our bubble has expanded tremendously, and on the other hand we realize that maybe this very radical and extreme approach towards identification cannot really serve throughout a human life, where we go through stages just like nature does. So it was very interesting to me that it plays a little bit into the stories that we tell ourselves and we never let go of them. Is also that the identifications that we do, we never let go of them. So it kind of just accumulates. And the thing is that the only part of ourselves that really needs identification, and I don't judge this, it's a good thing that this part needs the identification, is the ego. Because it's the ego that is the separation part. So if I am an I and you are a you, I have to define my I to actually understand what is good for me, and you have to understand you to understand what's good for you. And then we can meet in the middle, and this is called boundaries, yeah? But to do so, I have to identify with things, because I will repeat this over and over again until, because a lot of people really don't understand that humans do not learn about you telling them things. Humans learn by having a good role model. So there needs to be someone that does it in a certain way already, and then they can copy that. And then from the copying, they will maybe evolve or create their own way of doing that. Yeah, by being inspired by the role model that did it in a certain way. But that's why identification is so important. But the thing is that oftentimes we get stuck in the identification. And this, when it came from the outside, this identification, when it was inspired by the outside, either because I saw something that I'm really pro of, then I want to identify with that. Or maybe I saw something that I'm really con about. So I chose to like identify over really being against that. Yeah, both of them are identifications. It doesn't read, there is no real difference. So the thing with that is that when it comes to relationships, and this is something that happened to me, and it also happened to a lot of my clients, so I feel like this is maybe more of a collective topic, is that when we have a new friendship, when we like meet someone on a friendship level and there is no sexual interest at all, normally we naturally let that relationship like grow. Yeah, it just like happens or it doesn't, simply based on our interest and maybe of on the time that we both are free so we can actually spend it together, and our hobbies, so the things we want to do in our free time, that either they match or they don't. So we really take that time in a friendship to let that just like evolve, right? um but with a relationship, many of us like really go into that pattern of we have to give it a definition. And this is the same like an identification. Yeah. So, and like I'm not saying that certain agreements like being exclusive or whatever aren't good or healthy. But what I observed is that a lot of people say that they are in a relationship together when they haven't been dating like a long time. So, and what I see from like from just the point of view that I established in my life is that in the first 3 months you will most probably not really meet the person that is there. And this is related to a lot of things. Like I saw people on the internet saying that it's because we want to keep up our mask, and they kind of framed it in a very egotistical way that sounded kind of judgmental, and I didn't really like that, because to me it's like very natural. So when we grew up in today's Western society, there are like two human beings. There is the being that is conditioned, that was taught how it can interact with people and how it can't interact with people. This was done over the society it grew up in, over the family it grew up in, and all the mechanisms that were at hand there. Yeah? So, like, there are plenty of different ways on how that was coded into the system. So, that's the conditioned self. But then there is also the self that is still there, that normally only shows when we're at home and we're with people that we really feel at home with, in spaces that we feel really secure and safe, and we know that we can really share ourselves. And it's a safety mechanism of our brain to, when we meet new people and we are really just vibing into their energy, and both sides are still like finding out how the other person feels. Normally, first the conditioned self will show, unless these people that have sexual interest in each other now have been on a friendship term for a long time before and got really intimate. And that's kind of the point of this whole thing, that through our need for identification, we often overstep our own need for slowness and our own system. Like it's our physical system that needs time to process the energy of a new person. Our physical system, this is not even esoteric, our physical system needs time to adjust to another physical being energetically. And what kind of makes it a bit worse is that when we like have shared sexual interest with another person. And we have a lot of body contact. There is a lot of oxytocin, which is kind of the relationship hormone, or the hormone of connection. And when we like get into physical contact with a new person in the beginning, there is a lot of oxytocin that's like released in our brains, and it's there to actually establish a connection. Now, this is a very beautiful thing, but the downside to it is that this oxytocin is louder than all the other hormones. It's louder than our critical thinking. It's louder than maybe other parts of ourselves that normally have the reign. And that's good because we need this kind of flush of oxytocin and also adrenaline and serotonin. There is a lot of things going on in our body when we are in love. But this oxytocin, like this very high level of oxytocin, is actually there so that we can start to build intimacy with another person. It's very needed because otherwise, because we are so conditioned today, it's very important that we kind of have this high so we get to know each other on a deeper level. Yeah. The thing is that we live in a society that is very strong in physical contact. Yeah, it's very natural to have sexual intercourse very early on after meeting each other and stuff like that. So physical contact is very quick. Yet a lot of us have not learned how to communicate clearly or to really stand our ground, set up our boundaries. A lot of people, when they are in their conditioned self, are people pleasers. I am like that too. So it needs some time until my real self shows. And I don't fight that anymore because actually it's a safety mechanism and it's very good because I don't want to form intimacy with anybody. Now, we already created this society where we overstep the physical boundaries very quickly, or we just like, we don't take the time that the physical body would actually need to vibe into another person. Also because, like, there are things like horniness and things like biological clocks ticking and all that stuff. Yeah, in the end, our bodies want to reproduce. So, of course, there is a lot of like sexual tension once both are interested in having sexual intercourse. Now, the thing with that is that I don't speak against that, but what I like just observed with my own life path and the path of my clients is that when we go there very quickly, there is like a certain feeling of connection that is based on the oxytocin that was like very high or peaking even when we had sexual intercourse. But the problem is that this connection cannot always be copied to the communication level. So it cannot always be copied to a mental level or like, let's say, a mind level. Yeah. And also there, we just need a lot of time. And because we don't allow ourselves the slowness that it would actually take to like build a relationship or like build something that can result in a like real relationship, we actually kind of just get stuck in the idea of our ego that when we give it a definition, when we identify with it in some way or another, it's sure, it's safe, it will be there. Like when I say you're my boyfriend, you will be my boyfriend. And that's just like, it's a weird joke that our brain plays with itself because there is no such thing as security. And I don't want you to mistake that with decision because of course relationships aren't always easy. And sometimes what made a long-term relationship work was actually both people being committed by deciding I'm staying with this. But I strongly believe after all the experience I gathered that you cannot in these times where we grew up in a certain way, influenced by certain programmings and conditionings. I don't believe when you didn't have a friendship before, that's very important, that you can say within the first 3 months of meeting that this will be your forever mate. Yeah. And I'm not saying that you cannot experience true love in these 3 months, but I say that the things that maybe trigger you with the other person, or the things that maybe are red flags for you, and all these kind of things, they most probably they will only show after 3 months or even later, depending on the conditioning and depending on how much time you spend together and depending on the level of intimacy you share. And I believe that a lot of heartbreak that we experience in the 21st century could actually really be lessened by taking the time. That doesn't mean that we cannot be exclusive. It doesn't mean that we cannot set certain standards for how we want this to grow, and then maybe it can become a relationship. But by not taking it slow and by not taking the time to really tune into the vibe and tune into our physical body and let our physical body tune into the whole story of being with that other person. And we as beings, we're chemical beings. So some days you will have another chemical composure than you have on other days, and so do I. And so we just need a lot of time to understand if we vibe with a person, if we don't vibe with a person, on what level we vibe with that person. And it's really, really, really difficult for the mind to grasp, because the mind has the feeling that, oh, I thought it, so it can be now. And that's just not how it works. We're on planet Earth here. It takes time. Everything takes time. And another lie that the mind tells itself is that if I take it slow, it will take longer. And this is like I had this thought for a very long time myself, and when I just realized that, wow, when I take things slower, I actually have more time, although this sounds paradoxical. But the thing is that the more time I actually give myself to do certain things, the better the quality of these things is. And the stronger they will have an impact on what's happening. Yeah? So I can be very quick and do a lot of things when I'm quick, and all of these things will have a little impact. Or I can do things slow, and they will be created slow. And maybe they even have a slow impact, but it's a very strong impact. Yeah? So velocity doesn't always equal strength. It doesn't always equal power. And I believe that, especially when we look into nature, we can see that everything has its time and there is a timing. It's also very true when it comes to discipline. Yeah? Because, I even know people, and it happened to me myself, that I knew all of what I was talking about right now, and still I jumped into having a relationship with someone again that I didn't know for 3 months or longer. And that's where discipline comes in. Because knowing something and acting accordingly when you're high on oxytocin are two different things. And I don't think that anybody should judge themselves for that. But the more aware we are and the more we know about these things, because in the end, knowledge is power, the quicker we are in understanding, oh, I jumped ahead of my time. My body is not there. And also, we hurt less people when we really understand that we can take our time. We hurt less people, including ourselves, because with definition comes pain. So when I identify with something, like being in a relationship with you, and then you after 4 months realize that you don't want to live life the way I do, so actually we wouldn't see each other, and you don't want to make the space and time to see me outside of your things that you do. And then you have to quit the relationship, and it will hurt way more, because through the definition and through the identification, I added a future. This future was at any given point inexistent, because it wasn't now, but still I attached certain visions, sometimes even actions. Maybe there are holidays planned together or whatever, but let's just stay with the vision and the heartbreak that comes with that. As soon as I picture you being the person I have a family with, or I have children with, like if that's my goal in life, or in my world, that would be if I picture you being the person that I can be creative with for the rest of my days and just have a good time and be vibe. And then you suddenly pull back, that's so much pain. That's a heartbreak, because then I get really rejected. But when we stay in a space where we say, okay, let's give these 3 or 6 months where first we meet the conditioned self of the other, then we meet the unconditioned self of the other, and then we can see what all of this feels like once the oxytocin isn't as high anymore, and like everyday life has taken over the adventure a little bit. And that hurts so much less, because then you're in an experiment. Actually, the word experiment is like the best word there is for everything in life. Whenever you feel stuck in your life, like remind yourself that it is an experiment and you can change anytime you want. Yeah, I'm not saying that you suddenly can earn way more money in another job, but you can still change your job. Like even if maybe you have to start at the bottom again, it like what you do today should always be an experiment. Does it make me feel good? Does it pay the bills? Can I do it without suffering? All of these things. Everything we do is always an experiment. And whenever I feel like too stuck in a thing, I have to take back the perspective of it being an experiment. And when I'm in that level of experimentation, I also don't feel it as much. I don't feel as much pain when somebody says, "Oh, I'm sorry. Now I kind of feel like we don't match for being in a long-term relationship after 4 or 5 months," because we were still in the experimentation phase. We were still in a phase where we were like looking into just like, hey, how much do you enrich my life and how much do I enrich your life, and how much can you maybe help each other out, and how much of a symbiosis is possible there. Yeah, because of course there is like a certain thing of polarities in relationships always, but these polarities still have to play out in a certain way that's like matching each other. Yeah. So like for example, I as an artist am very good in just occupying myself with creative stuff. And sometimes this will be more important than like having a nice evening with my partner or something, just because I'm in the flow and I really want to stay there. And we can talk about discipline now again, because that's the issue there. No, you should actually be able to stop and then start again the next day, but I'm just not like that. So a person that maybe cannot like that likes to socialize, that likes to be having the attention of the partner all the time, or being like always the main thing, will not be able to like enjoy a relationship with me, and I will not be able to enjoy a relationship with them. And that's a very like a very differentiated and very analytical point of view. I know like there is not much emotion behind that, but it's because I want to create an emotion where we have relationships where everybody feels happy and welcome just as they are, not by just staying in the conditioned self, because the unmasked self would maybe trigger too much in a person. Because here comes the next thing, that when we say we are in a relationship within the first 3 months, it gets so hard to get out of it when this whole thing is kind of a comfort zone. Yeah, when it's not a comfort zone and we don't feel good in it, we will go out. But when we already feel comfortable and it kind of suits our schedule and it's all good, but we feel that it's not the real thing, then it's so easy to just stay there, because we kind of already made that deal, right? And otherwise I'd just be alone again, right? So I just stay here, right? And that's just like, again, because it would mean that we let go of the identification. It would mean that we let go of the definition again. And so many parts of us desire a structure, desire a home on this planet. That's not only the ego. Yeah, like we really desperately all are looking for places where we feel really welcome just the way we are. And once we like kind of just got a little bit of that in a relationship, it can be just a tiny little bit, but already it's more than we had before. Maybe it comes with a lot of hassle too, but who cares, because we get this tiny little bit and then we stay. And we know it's not really honest, you know, But then again, we also know that, the world is cold and empty, and we have this little thing that we found, and we want to keep it. And I also believe that there is not a problem with that, as long as there is honest communication about it. Yeah. So maybe when we are in this relationship that is not a relationship because it's an experiment for 4 or 6 months, and then we come to the end of it, and we're maybe having a talk about, how do you feel about that experiment? Do you want to continue with me or not? And how do you want to how do we want to structure that, or whatever floats your boat then? I feel like then we can also look into, okay, do you want this to be just like friendship plus? Do you want this to be like a real partner in crime situation? And all of these kind of things, because like, again, when we already defined it and it's already a relationship, it's not an experiment anymore, then it gets really hurtful to be honest to the other person. And because we were all conditioned to be nice, which is in the end a good thing, we don't want to hurt others. And I feel like we should stop beating ourselves up for not wanting to hurt others, because that's a beautiful thing. The problem comes with then not being honest. So I believe that the more honesty we can bring into any kind of connection with other people, especially when there is common sexual interest, is when we have the honesty in the beginning to say, let's call this an experiment. And let's not, like, even if we have this oxytocin, that's why I talk about these chemicals so much as well. Like, even if we have this rush of oxytocin, and even if we're super high on each other for 3 months and sex is just so good and we feel so connected, we will still stay with the thought that this is an experiment, and we will see how it all feels when it cools down. When it's just like not as many hormones flushing our system anymore. Yeah. And I'm not saying that this is the new like relationship manual and everybody should follow this advice, but I just know that it saved me a lot of terrible heartbreak, and also it saved me a lot of times where I otherwise would have been like very hurtful to other people simply because of their expectations. Because that's the thing, with the definition always comes an expectation. And that's the thing, like, that's why the ego loves definitions so much and identifications, because then that means I can get everything I want from you now because you're my partner. So that's why, like, I realized that, I think I talked about that before, when I was married, and I suddenly became this picture of who my subconscious believed a married woman should be. And it didn't like reflect in my behavior at work or anything, but at home, like, and when I looked at it afterwards, I was like, wow, crazy. Like, it didn't, like, sometimes you don't even realize it when it plays out in the moment. So I believe that knowing that we have this thing with oxytocin and with serotonin and with adrenaline and with dopamine and all these things, because, like, our bodies want to reproduce. How do we reproduce? When we get high on all these hormones and then we want to fuck. So just to say it as it is, yeah? So that's why all of this is happening, because nature wants us to produce babies. That's like on an analytical level, that's the only reason why this is happening. But I'm a strong believer in true love, and I believe that true love is another thing. I believe true love is like real connection over things that like really matter to both parties. And I believe that this connection can only be unearthed or found after this time of being fully in love. And I'm like also not saying that this being in love feeling cannot continue onward. It might take a little bit more work to have the same rush, but it's possible. Yeah. So, but still, like, I believe that because we get stuck in this definition of relationship, we oftentimes are like, because when it's a definition, then it's also yes or no. There is no other way to do it anymore. And I believe that maybe like if we open that up, there might be a possibility to just like experiment for yourself when you're younger. And you don't like, I know that younger people already do that. So, and I truly like that and appreciate that, because it's really about like, when we get stuck in these definitions, there is only yes or no. And when we take it slow, which was the introduction of this episode, and we stay with our body and with our feelings, and we know what our body is and what it does, like described, the rush of oxytocin and all these things. And we also know that what the ego wants to do, The ego is so in love with this high that the other person creates, or the closeness of the other person, that it wants to nail this person down. Because it's like, oh my God, you give me such a nice high. I want to keep you forever. And that's exactly where the heartbreak comes in. Because maybe after 3 months, when the rush wore off, you actually don't want to keep this person forever. But then you already made the promise. And words are very powerful, although currently we don't act like they are, but they are very powerful. So by giving a promise, like, I am a person of honor, so also when I give a promise, it's very hard for me to get back from that promise. Especially when, like, I can choose staying in a relationship that's not good for me and leaving myself for that, or I can hurt you. Like, I can either hurt me or you. As soon as there is a definition and there is a yes or no, I can only hurt, like, there is hurt on one side. I mean, maybe there are some, like, very rare occasions where people, like, both decide the same thing. But in most occasions, it's like not both deciding the same thing. So one of them will be hurt. And understanding that it's the definition and the story, here we are again at this topic, the story that we tell ourselves towards this definition, which are subconscious patterns or codes or programs that we once wrote about this subject, enables us to free ourselves of these mechanisms, and understanding that we tell ourselves stories all the time. For example, we have this belief that there is something called a failed relationship. And to me, there is no such thing as a failed relationship, because every relationship that failed was a teaching towards the relationship that we actually want to be in. Yeah? So already having this perspective that this can fail also kind of tightens the whole area. And I believe that, like, intimacy and human relationships are actually one of the lost wild play fields that there is. That's one of the playgrounds that still is out there. And it's accessible for anyone who has a body and is incarnated. And I believe that when we understand how we work and how our bodies work and how they influence us and how our ego influences us, that doesn't necessarily mean that these things will change, but we can find ways of communicating that, hey, I need more time. I cannot decide that right now. And we can reclaim our own cycles and our own natural timing, which is different from human to human as well, by this example. Yeah. And I mean, as I said in the beginning, I take the example of relationships right now, but it's happening with a lot of things. Like also deciding whether or not you want to do a job, deciding whether or not you want to have this commute every day. All of these things, like also reminding ourselves constantly that it's us who makes the decision day in and day out. It's not somebody else who makes the decision for us. Of course, the frame in which we can decide is very limited. Especially in Western society today. It's very limited, but you have the choice, Like, people always, like, told me humans cannot fly. And I said, well, they can fly, but the price they will pay is that they are dead. But don't tell me that they cannot fly. It's just a very big, high price that they pay. If you say, like, they cannot fly like birds, yes, I agree. But we can fly. We can fly off a building, right? And I don't mean that, like, in a very morbid way or anything, but a lot of times we have these limits in our brains that we cannot do something because we don't want to pay the price for it. And that's just not true. Then the honest thing would be, I don't want to pay the price for it. And then it's a different perspective, because then it's like, okay, it's okay, because I don't want to do that. It costs that much, Like, for example, I really want to fly, but I don't want to fly and be dead afterwards. So I will not fly. I mean, I did some skydiving and stuff like that, for sure. But you know what I mean, right? So having this perspective helps us in a lot of things. Also by, like, identifying with things is not limited to relationships. Like, we identify with the roles we play in our friend circles, in society, in our community, in our family, in our workplace. And oftentimes, it's actually the stories that we tell ourselves about what we are experiencing that are kind of creating a heartbreak or a pain. Because there is a certain framework, there is a certain conditioning on how these things should be or how I should be. And by reclaiming ourselves the time to understand, does this match me? And I will not understand on a mental level if this is a match or not. It will be a feeling. How do I feel when I see that person? How do I feel when I go to that job? How do I feel when I do this work? It's about a physical feeling. I'm not even talking about emotions. Of course, they are very closely related, but it's really a physical feeling. Do you feel good? Or like if you're very traumatized, maybe good is too much. Do you feel okay? That's already a lot. Feeling okay is a lot. And like if you feel okay and you're a person that cannot maybe feel more at the moment, then that's perfect. Like if you're a person that has the capacity to feel really good and you feel really down and out after you've worked, maybe you should look into, is my workplace fitting me? Is the work environment fitting me? What's not matching me? And that doesn't even mean that you have to look for a new job or whatever, but knowing yourself is the key to your dreams. So once we understand, oh, I don't feel good, and maybe I find the reasons for it, or maybe I don't, but where are the perspectives? Then it's an experiment again. And it's so much more fun if it's an experiment. And with this thought of an experiment really must go hand in hand the thought of slowness. Because I believe like a lot of us have already experimented with a lot of things, but we did it very quickly. Like if you're like me and you have internal like ADHD, you will like have had like hyper focuses or whatever a lot of times, and maybe you spend a lot of money on some interest that was peaking at the moment, and then you just left it aside. So I experimented with a lot of things. Yeah, with ideas, perspectives, techniques, different forms of energy, work, and like whatever comes to your mind, I will have experimented with it. But the things that stuck with me were the things that I approached slowly and that I did over a long period of time. Because then it kind of just starts to come all together, right? And for that, we need a certain kind of slowness. It doesn't even mean that the action you do has to be slow, but it has to be continuous over a longer period of time. Because from a cosmic perspective, that means slow. So, yeah, the more we go into the perspective of this is an experiment and I can take my time with it, and I don't need to know anything with my head. My body will tell me. And no matter how dissociated I am from my body, it will tell me one way or the other. I can be totally sure of that. That if something is a match for me or not. And you will, like, when you do that, no matter if it's in a relationship or whatever, if you have this, like, honesty, you will see how much magic clarity creates. Because suddenly you meet people that are actually open to the idea of that, and you will feel more comfortable with the idea of that. And also, there will be more times where you realize, okay, maybe that is not a match for me because of this and that, and you are honest and you communicate that, or you just stay, not even communicating, just staying in this clarity that this is maybe not that. And suddenly a new opportunity arises because you know yourself and you know what's good for you and what's not. Many times because we're taking things fast. As soon as we realize something is off, we feel like we have to change it immediately. But the thing is that the answer to the problem lies in the moment. So more often than not, we actually prolong the distance to the solution by running towards it instead of arriving fully in the moment and taking things slow. And so by these two keywords, the perspective of experimentation and the real action of slowness, no matter how it shows, will actually create lesser distance to the fulfillment of our dreams. Although that's totally not what our ego believes. Yeah, our ego believes that I have to go really slow, I have to go really fast, and I have to know all the solutions right now. And because this right now feels off, for sure the answer or the solution will not be here and not now. But it's the opposite. So, yeah, I really hope this was interesting to you. I know I was all over the place again, but you can get used to that because that's just how these things will go from now on. But yeah, I hope this was really interesting to you. And maybe, like, if you feel like it, share this oxytocin information with as many people as you know, because, or that maybe are interested in this information, because it's really important to understand that also, like a new hobby can peak oxytocin, everything can peak oxytocin, and it will take some time to just like having it in a normal flow. Yeah, anything that makes you feel connected will give you an oxytocin rush, and we behave differently when we are on the oxytocin rush. So it's interesting to know, because we kind of have this in-body drug or drugs that we don't really know a lot about, and we actually, a lot of our actions and behaviors is based on these hormones and these molecules that are going on inside of us. And the more we understand that, the more we can actually create a life that integrates this knowledge and just is very honest about us being physical beings and us like working the way we work and not judging that or trying to put that into a certain structure, but rather see it as an experiment of nature, because that's what we are too. Everything is an experiment. Why shouldn't your life be too? Why should there be like this structure? Because it means safety, but we can find a lot of safety in experimentation and in slowness too. Okay. I wish you a lovely day ahead. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope I hear you again next week. Namaste and speak soon. Bye bye.